The United States currently operates over 800 military bases around the world and accounts for 37% of all global defense spending. That military footprint is backed by total economic saturation. To participate in international trade, countries almost always have to use the US dollar. Yet for its first 70 years, the nation operated with a fiercely anti-imperialist mindset. Early American leaders and Congress actively opposed global entanglements, repeatedly blocking attempts to annex overseas territories. The breaking point arrived with the Industrial Revolution. Explosive domestic economic growth created a surplus of goods and a demand for new foreign markets to sell them in. Managing this surging economy also required a larger, more centralized federal government. The country had produced more than its domestic borders could consume. Maintaining that rapid financial growth meant pure isolationism was no longer an option. In 1898, President William McKinley pushed past intense domestic opposition and led the country into war with Spain over the island of Cuba. The U.S. easily defeated the Spanish Empire. In the victory, the country acquired Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. With those specific acquisitions, the United States officially became an overseas colonial empire. While 1898 proved the country had the industrial capacity to project force across the globe, direct military occupation is incredibly expensive. They had not yet designed a system to maintain that level of influence sustainably. Following World War I, President Woodrow Wilson attempted to build an international organization called the League of Nations, an early attempt to dictate peace through a systemic global body. Congress, however, rejected the treaty. Isolationist sentiment was still a major political force, pulling the country back from the global stage for the next 2 decades. World War II removed the financial barriers to global expansion. By the end of the conflict, the United States was the only major power that had avoided total economic ruin. To fight the war, the government had coordinated with civilian industries, shifting them into wartime production. Arms manufacturing exploded during this period, accounting for a staggering 40%. The UN Charter outlawed wars of conquest, while deliberately granting the U.S. permanent veto power over security decisions. The economic rulebook was drafted at the massive 1944 Bretton Woods Agreement. Here, delegates established the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank to govern international finance. This network map illustrates the core mechanism of Bretton Woods. The agreement required member countries to guarantee the convertibility of their currencies into U.S. dollars, effectively installing the dollar as the world's primary reserve currency. Before fighting had even stopped, these agreements locked American supremacy into international law. Historically, the country would demobilize its military after a war, but the rapid rise of the Soviet Union presented an ideological adversary that prevented a return to isolationism. President Harry Truman adopted a policy of containment, an open promise of military and diplomatic support to any country threatened by communist expansion. This led to the formation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, a contractual alliance that legally bound the United States to the defense of Western Europe. Containment required the military machine to stay active. The defense posture transitioned from a temporary wartime measure into a permanent, globally deployed police force. These military alliances were deliberately paired with deep economic intervention. The goal was to ensure allied nations were systemically reliant on American capital. Through programs like the Marshall Plan, the government injected massive amounts of capital into devastated European nations. They rebuilt their infrastructure, which in turn allowed them to purchase American exports. This economic aid accelerated the spread of U.S. culture and commercial products across the globe. By making the system financially and culturally attractive, compliance became voluntary rather than purely coercive. The Cold War eventually ended, but the institutions created to defeat the Axis powers and contain the Soviets, NATO, the UN, the IMF, were never dismantled. They remained the baseline of international politics. This is how a superpower operates. It relies on a self-sustaining architectural loop, where global stability depends entirely on U.S. institutions, and U.S. prosperity depends exactly on maintaining that order.